Hi, everyone. Welcome to the very first Facebook Live interview for MS Insight. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Erica Anderson. I'll be hosting today, and I'm so excited to kick things off with our CEO and founder, Wendy Booker. Thank you, Wendy, for coming on to tell your story.
Hey, thank you for having me do this. This is great.
Yeah, well, when we first met, I really had no idea how inspirational your story really was. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized we really needed to tell our audience about it so they could just hear all that you've been through and all the many ways that you can inspire them. So to kick us off, you are someone who has lived with MS yourself, and you are now fighting for patients around the country with your organization. So get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and how long ago you got your diagnosis.
22 years ago, which
Wow.
is quite a while now. In 1998, I was diagnosed. Although, like many people with multiple sclerosis, I probably had it for a lot longer and chose to either deny the symptoms or ignore them. And that's what most of us do. I can probably trace it back, probably almost a good 20 years before that. I started having some strange neurological things. I was finally diagnosed in June of 1998. I didn't know much about MS, and like all of us who first hear the words MS, our mind goes to that worst case scenario. We probably picture somebody we know in our past who doesn't look too well, a neighbor, a friend, an aunt. And unfortunately, that's where everybody goes, and you get that blank look at the physician who just told you. We joke within the MS community because often we'll say, oh my gosh, am I one of Jerry Lewis's kids? Which is not the case, but that's where we all start from, that we think cystic fibrosis or all other illnesses. Somehow MS is not in our, at least it wasn't in my vocabulary, not
Mm-hmm.
having another family member or so. But anyway, I realized that that starting place is a very frightening spot to stand there, look at the doctor, blank look on your face. You're playing in their head that this was a really bad diagnosis. And I'm trying to change all that. And really, from that starting point back in 1998 for me, through educating myself and through working directly with a pharmaceutical company, I realized that that does not have to be the first place our brain goes. And as I jokingly say, this ain't your mama's MS.
Yeah.
We've been very lucky, but that's where I started. That's where we all started. And that's been my mission to alter that.
Yeah, no, you talk about, you finally went, you thought you probably had it for a lot longer. What are some of those early symptoms that people start to feel where they might be questioning, could this be MS?
Uh, MS is different in everybody. It progresses differently in everybody, and you can't never make a judgment call on, oh, their MS can't be that bad. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason is we don't always see the silent symptoms that many people suffer with. Also, there's debate medically on this, but there's two different ways or paths that multiple sclerosis goes. 85% are like myself and diagnosed with something called relapsing remitting MS, whereby we come on with symptoms. Those symptoms may never go away, but we plateau or we stay in remission. Then we might have a bump and go into an exacerbation or a flare up, but we want to get back down to that remission spot again. So that's called relapsing remitting. The other form of MS, which is much more insidious, is called primary progressive. Often that can be determined in two forms, whereby you're diagnosed with MS, you never get into remission, you just steadily decline. Another percentage of the MS population is diagnosed with relapsing remitting, but over time it stops going into remission and starts a steady downhill, which is called secondary primary progressive. So that's, again, all of that needs to be determined. Now, as far as symptoms of early diagnosis or how I knew something was going on, as I said, I ignored a lot of the earlier symptoms. In my case, there was paralysis of my arms very early on, loss of vision, which is quite common. In fact, I think statistically I heard that most MS patients are diagnosed when they go in for an eye exam. The eye doctor spots something called optic neuritis, which is, and it can manifest itself by a blurring vision, almost like a Vaseline in the eye, total loss of vision. It's so peculiar, though, because in some people, as in my case, my vision came back. So I ignored it, which is often the case. What finally drove me to seek medical help was I had numbness and tingling in my left leg that was not going away and was getting worse. I then sought out medical help and said, I don't know, I was a runner. I just started the sport of running. And I joke, I did it with a girlfriend because we were getting kicked out of so many gyms for talking too much. So I started running, and that's when the numbness and tingling became very profound, and I started having trouble with my gait. And then I fell for no apparent reason. And I jokingly, we all call that the MS fall, where you turn around and you expect a tree root or a rock or a Volkswagen, and there's nothing there. And so that's that. It's funny because it's kind of vanity that prompted me to say, I better get some medical help. I just fell for no reason. So you'll hear a common thread with people with MS of similar journeys to that diagnosis. And but we all end up back in that doctor's office hearing those words MS. Now, surprisingly, you are often relieved when you hear it's multiple sclerosis. It's a diagnosis of elimination. And when you hear some of the things they're looking for, brain tumor, tumor on the spinal cord, there's almost a sense of, oh, thank God it's only MS.
Yeah.
So again, that's a very similar story you'll hear from others with the multiple sclerosis.
Now, do you happen to know, is there a particular age when this strikes, or is it really across the board?
Predominantly, it strikes women twice as much as men, two to one. And second, it's usually women in the prime of their years of career, moms, families, between ages 20 and 40.
Oh, wow.
We, of course, know it's younger, and we know it's older, but those are and I was 44 when I was diagnosed, so I was just on the other edge of it. But like I say, I had the symptoms for much longer, so I was probably quite a bit younger. But that seems to be when it hits the hardest. Now, interestingly enough, when men get it, and especially men of color or of Asian descent, they often get a much more severe disease course, which is frightening. Yeah. All of that is being studied, why men get it worse, and in particular, why men of color seem to get it worse. So it's difficult because there are so many unknowns with this illness.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just like so many diseases, that's why the research is so important, to just continue that research and advocacy and getting patients' voices out there so we know what we need to be looking for. Now, when you said you had just started running, you got your diagnosis. So, as a person who is physically fit and all of those things, how did you feel, right away? What was your thought process?
I felt that I had some control because I stayed physically active, or at least was doing something to defy the diagnosis. Now, again, so much as timing. Back in the 90s, let me back up even more. Prior to 1993, there were no therapies for multiple sclerosis. So anyone who was diagnosed before then was pretty much, we call it in the trade, diagnose and adios. There was nothing they could do. They were sent home. If they had a flare-up or an exacerbation, they're put on a course of steroids, salumedrol. What that does is reduces the inflammation and hopefully reduces how severe the relapse is. But the fact that there was so little that could be done for a person with multiple sclerosis, they really pretty much went home and waited. What a frightening way to live. So there was a lot of luck on my side that I was diagnosed just literally when these therapies had come out. The other part that has changed, two big changes. Before MRI, as late as the mid to late 80s, one of the definitive diagnoses for multiple sclerosis was they put people into hot water or hot tubs. People with MS often cannot handle heat because of our core body temperature. If that gets overheated, it affects the nerves, and we're inclined to have a harder disease course temporarily. You can cool down and come back. But that was a way that they tested if you had multiple sclerosis, by throwing you into a hot tub, and if you became it's almost like a rag doll. You really lose your energy. That was how they diagnosed. So how fortunate, here we now have the MRI, and we're really able to trigger in on especially the brain. Now, the other part was that prior to the 90s, and even when I was diagnosed, so it might have even been later than that, we were told don't exercise. Because of that heat, they were afraid that by exercising we would overheat, we would have symptoms that would not go away. I personally thought, I don't care. I want to keep moving. I don't want this disease to catch me. I definitely was doing this. You can't catch me. I know I was. But I came to learn that by being active and pushing through, even though I won't recommend going out and killing yourself on a really hot day, but by doing something proactively, athletically, I really felt ahead of the illness. So that's really where my whole athletic life started. Before that, I wasn't particularly athletic.
That's so interesting that it would start there. Now, you, I will brag on you for a second. You have summited many mountains, you've run many marathons, among other things. So, what, aside from just, hey, I'm getting physical now, like you were like, I'm going to go do everything out there. So, what was it that inspired you specifically to do some of those things that I just mentioned?
Well, inspiration was multiple sclerosis, was let me see how hard and how far I can push back. Initially, my intention was not to go crazy like I have. I wanted to run a marathon. I didn't even do it on my own. I have a friend I was running with. As I said, we were kicked out of every gym. And at the almost to the day of my diagnosis, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she's doing great. She's now a 22-year survivor herself. But it was interesting to both of us that it doesn't matter what you are diagnosed with, it's how you perceive it and how you move forward from there. And we were lucky because we had each other to talk about our feelings and ping off of each other of how are you doing? Well, I'm okay. How are you doing? And so that was already where we started from. And I came to realize that what happens to us when we receive a diagnosis, and again, it's not necessarily just MS, you get immobilized. You don't want to look to the past because now you're mourning what you think you have to give up or are losing. You don't want to look future because it's so scary and unpredictable. So you get stuck. And I call that here and now, that pity party, that immobility. And I tease myself and really my MS audience, and I say, that's where you lay on the couch, eat bonbons, and watch Ellen. Because you, with the blanket pulled over your head in the fetal position, you're not going anywhere. You're getting a lot of information. You're told by your aunt that you shouldn't work out. You're told by somebody else that you need to remove your fillings of your teeth because that increased. There's so much information hitting you. That's part of why you're immobilized. You don't know what to do. You think you're going to break. We all get that pity party. I've returned to that sofa several times over the 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
You can't stay there. Life is for living. You need to live. And so you can figure out with your MS what that life is going to look like. It's not what you expected. Count on that. But it certainly can be interesting and fulfilling, but you do have to push. Kind of like we're doing right now in COVID, actually. It's back to like that kind of ho-hum of every day. Kind of looks like Groundhog Day and where am I going from here? And I do have to push because you get despondent and down and out. So anyway, this little friend Carol, who's like half my height, which is funny as well. We make a very unpredictable running team. She called me up out of the blue and said, why don't we run the Boston Marathon? And I teased her 22 years later. And I said to her, wow, yeah, why not? Because to me, it sounded like she said, why don't we go to the mall? I had no idea what we were signing up for. But our thought was, let's see how hard and how far we can push back at that diagnosis. So we went into the training with very little expectations. And I pulled off running the Boston Marathon with MS, something that people weren't really doing. They were doing it. I wasn't the first by any means, but they weren't as vocal as I was. It was like, oh my gosh, I've just defied what I thought I could do. And as a result of that, the pharmaceutical companies started to take an interest because, as I said, this is when these new drugs were just coming out. So it all came crashing together after I ran that marathon in 2000. So that's where my athletic career started.
So, at what point in time did you decide, hey, I want to do more with this? I want to help other patients. I want to empower people, provide information, and ultimately start MS Insight?
It started really right after that marathon because I was starting to be asked about doing interviews. Hey, what was it like? That's when I said, by what I'm able to do, I should share this information with others. I should say to them, I know what it's like. I know the unpredictability. I know how it is to suffer on a hot summer day and question, is it me? Is it the heat? Is it MS? All those brain things. I notice that how much better I feel when I move or find something I love to do. And that's where, again, it was my own journey. I realized that during the times I was doing something I love, and in my case, running, I forget about the MS. That's where you're going to get your power. So I encouraged people with multiple sclerosis, find something you love. It doesn't have to be physical, although your doctor and your body will love it if it is. But maybe it's taking up painting, learning how to play an instrument, teaching a kid how to read, something that takes your mind away from you. Because as soon as you're thinking of you, you're thinking of your MS. But when you're thinking of something you love to do and you immerse yourself into it, the MS takes a back seat. And that's where your strength and your voice and your forward momentum will come from. I can't take the MS away, but I can emphatically promise people that while they're doing something they love, the MS is in that back seat. As a result of that, I realized that's where the advocacy piece is. And that's where I can take my mission and all the crazy things I was doing, climbing the highest mountains in the world and going to the poles, and say, hey, find that thing. It gave me, and that's why I pushed myself to do these mountains and the polar exploration. It gave me a platform from which to speak. I could speak otherwise, but I wouldn't have had a global platform to say, listen, if I can do it, anybody can. It's a frame of mind, and it's learning about the illness, connecting with others, networking, all those things that will get you out the door and living. And that's how I use that to catapult the advocacy and came to be with MS Insights now.
And
now,
so, sorry, go.
Yeah, I was going to, sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
I was very fortunate that a pharmaceutical company heard me very early on. And I worked for years for Teva Neuroscience, and for 13 years represented them. And they were very good in that, as I said, those disease-modifying therapies were brand new in the 90s. And I became the mouthpiece to encourage patients to get on one of those disease-modifying therapies. That still is crucial to my mission. Back in the 90s, we only had 3 to choose from, but they totally changed the face of MS. They don't cure the illness, but they will keep us longer in remission, and that's what you want. Now we have something like 17 to choose from. So part of my advocacy, and a crucial part, is to encourage that newly diagnosed patient to get on one of those therapies. And often we'll say, oh, I'm not bad enough. I don't need to take one of those. That's the point. You want to stay that way, and you want to use those tools. So, and I know I will not advocate for any particular therapy, but I will advocate for the research behind it and getting a patient on a therapy. Tell the patient, go to that neurologist, find out all the different therapies. If you don't like the one you're on, you can switch. How wonderful is that? If you're having side effects, anything, you can change. So we have so many options available to us through good medical research. And the face of MS, as I say, this ain't your mama's MS, and those drugs have changed that. So there too was big part of my advocacy mission.
Yeah. And on top of that, for just the organization as a whole, do you have any other specific goals that you're looking to accomplish as the mission of the organization?
It's really fun to start this. I come with a very strong past, a resume of working with all these different pharmaceutical companies, as well as with many of the wonderful MS foundations out there, like the MS Foundation, the MS Society, MSAA, Can Do. I mean, the list goes on and on of these incredible nonprofits who are putting everything out there for those of us living with multiple sclerosis. I've worked with all of them. So that, and what we're trying to do with MS Insight is it's patient-driven. The patients are driving the conversation and getting the information. So it's patient to patient. Often we get most of our information from physicians, from nurse practitioners, but what I love about MS Insight is we're taking the patient's voice, their questions, their interests, their disease, and saying, okay, what do you want to hear? What questions do you want answered? And we're letting them drive what we are coming up with. Now, we have a 3 parts to our MS Insight. Unfortunately, COVID has made it now we have to concentrate on one. So right now we're doing webinars, and are creating a newsletter to find out the interest of the patients so that we are producing things specifically with the questions they have in mind. The webcast, we can take any topic, highlight a patient, get questions answered, and are doing that through social media with your help as well. The second part, of which I'm very excited once the world opens up again, is we are going to be covering all the conferences. I'll be like the reporter on duty and go to these conferences and find out medically what's going on through the Consortium of Multiple Sclerosis, ECTRIMS and ACTRIMS, which is where the physicians treating MS, that's their annual conference. Abilities Conference to find out the latest and greatest in devices for those of us who are disabled by the MS. And all of that, we will be covering the conferences as the reporters on the street and getting that information to the MS patient. Then the third piece is something that we inherited from a wonderful man named Alan Mandel. And Alan was the one who developed MS World Talks. And those talks are kind of like TED Talks. And with Alan's family, we have worked on doing the Alan Mandel MS Insight Talks, whereby we'll be giving live presentations at places like the Cleveland Clinic. And we'll have audiences as well as Facebook Live so that we can address the patients right there on the spot. And we'll have physicians, or again, it will come down, it's patient driven, so we'll find out what the consensus is on the type of speakers that we bring in. So this is taking everything I've learned for the past 20 years and now bringing it really to the patient, which is where I've always wanted to be. Getting a little old to be climbing the mountains, I think.
Well, I'm sure there are all kinds of smaller goals if you don't want to do mountain climbing anymore. It's like you don't have to run a full marathon. You could do a half.
I do a lot of halves. You know, my running right now is lackluster, but I think it's because I have COVID brain. Everybody's lackluster.
Yeah,
these days,
everybody has COVID. I mean, they canceled all the races. So
all the races. I did a virtual one, which was, at first I went into it ho-hum. It was kind of fun because, you know, it's just like this MS thing. It makes you get out the door. It all of a sudden makes you responsible, and you have to sign in and say how many miles you ran, and you can walk it. So that's another thing, that one of the programs that we recently did for MS Insight was to talk about how we're handling COVID and some of the tricks. And something like that did suddenly appeal to me, as it was something kind of to do. So we talked about that with all of us, about how can you get through this. Another little tip, by the way, Shirley, one of the gals who I work with at MS Insight, she's great because she says she makes it a daily mission to contact somebody, to reach out to somebody, either through email or a telephone call, but daily she gets in touch with the person, which I think that's a really cool mission. So those are the kind of things we deal with at MS Insight. Again, it's patient to patient, bringing in medical as well as clinical help, but putting it all to the patient and letting it be patient driven.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Wendy, thank you for sharing your story with us. I mean, there's obviously so much passion behind what you're doing. And we are excited to keep growing as MS Insight.
Oh, yes.
And so if you're watching this video now or later, please invite your friends to our page. Let them know that we exist and that we want to reach them. We want to be a resource and an advocate on their behalf as well. So thank you so much. We'll be doing these interviews hopefully at least once a month. So we'll let you know when the next one. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for helping us get MS Insight going, and I'll work on my social media piece too.
All right. We'll see you next time.